Welcome back. This week has seen Pope Francis's first visit to the African continent, and Sky's Foreign Affairs correspondent Lisa Holland now looks at the historic tour which has taken him from Kenya to Uganda and then on to the Central African Republic.
By the time he boarded the papal plane, he'd already been dubbed the Pope of Hope. Africa's poor knew Pope Francis would not forget them, but seek them out. Travelling to Kenya, Uganda and the war-torn Central African Republic, this was billed as one of the most dangerous missions a pope has ever undertaken. His advisors had wanted him to reconsider. When asked by journalists about security concerns, the Pope's response, he was more worried about Africa's mosquitoes than its terrorists.
Kwa nyimbo na nderemo na vifijo, msafara wake unawasili.
Three countries in 6 days. First stop Nairobi, and Kenyans were determined to give the Pope a warm welcome.
Young people of Kenya, show your love for the Holy Father.
Africa has seen the biggest growth in Catholicism anywhere in the world, and the Pope wants to harness that energy, but refuses to shy away from some of the big issues facing the continent. The themes of this trip would be poverty, corruption, peace and reconciliation. Kenya's leaders led the celebrations at a mass for young people at the Kasarani Stadium. But in a country plagued by corruption, the Pope had this message for the next generation, urging them not to accept bribes, likening the temptation to an unhealthy desire for sugar.
La corrupción es algo que se nos mete adentro. Corruption is something which eats inside. Es como el azúcar. It's like sugar. Es dulce, sweet. Nos gusta. We like it. Es fácil. It's easy. Y después terminamos mal. And then we end up in a poor way. Y en vez de tanta azúcar fácil, terminamos diabéticos o nuestro país termina diabético. So much sugar that we either end up being diabetic or our country ends up being diabetic.
In the speech that he gave when he spoke about the sugar of corruption, it was notable how the people in at the mass, at the event, really cheered him, with the exception of nearly all the leaders there. There was grim silence from some of those observing in positions of power. He seems to be unafraid of the consequences of that. He's determined to forge ahead with this, and it's something, of course, that ordinary Africans, people on the ground, who suffer the consequences of corruption, that they can't believe that somebody of his stature is daring to stand up there and say this.
From day one, security on this trip has been a big concern. Kenya has suffered at the hands of the Islamist terrorists Al-Shabaab, and if the militants wanted to spoil the party, the authorities were taking no chances, deploying 10,000 police for the Pope's visit. These are some of Nairobi's sprawling slums. It's often said that Kenya is owned by the rich and powerful, but Pope Francis was determined to find those who couldn't come to him, travelling to the shantytown of Kangemi. Here, thousands of families cram into iron shacks, living on a few dollars a day. Pope Francis has cast himself as a champion of the world's poor. Visiting St. Joseph the Worker Catholic Church, he called the slums wounds inflicted by the elite, condemning the unfair distribution of land, lack of access to infrastructure and minimal basic services.
very much for your hospitality.
How can I not denounce the injustices which you suffer, he said.
Well, I think this is typical Pope Francis, isn't it? The first time he went out of the Vatican after he'd been made Pope was to Lampedusa to see the refugees there. And everywhere that he goes, he identifies wherever he can with the marginalised, either the poor or those in prison. He wants to be close to those people because he says that's who we need to be close to. That's what his Year of Mercy is all about, is reaching out to the people who, for whatever reason, are pushed to the margins or denied dignity or living in poverty.
Hundreds of thousands turned out to see the Pope in Kenya. He spoke to packed stadiums, warning of the dangers of radicalisation and promoting reconciliation in a country which still bears the scars of ethnic division. Catholics in Africa had waited a long time to see the head of their church in person, and he didn't disappoint.
I can't.
No, there must be something that's making you guys cry. Tell us. Just tell us.
It's amazing. This is once in a lifetime. It's amazing. It's amazing.
From Kenya, the Pope flew west to neighbouring Uganda, a deeply religious country with more than 14 million Catholics. The pontiff was keen to see how the lively worship of the Pentecostal churches has in some way been copied in Uganda, inspiring a greater following in Catholicism. But he was not willing to use his platform in the country to speak out against one of its most controversial policies, the draconian treatment of homosexuals who can face life imprisonment for being gay. The 79-year-old Pope appeared to be moved as he visited a shrine honouring some of the country's first Christians who were burned alive. He paused for prayer to remember those who died in the late 1800s. But it was his subsequent speech which drew criticism from human rights groups who say he failed to speak up for those persecuted in Uganda in the modern age.
Uganda has a terribly draconian law against homosexuality, and it was hoped by the lesbian and gay community that the Pope would speak out on this and would stand up for lesbians and gays. But he seems to have avoided doing that. And I think this is the one area he might face criticism is from these communities after the visit. In fact, even in one speech where he spoke of what the gospel does and doesn't say, he dropped a passage that many believe was a reference to the gospel's teachings on homosexuality.
Reconciliation was a message the Pope did want to promote, not least on the final leg of his African trip. From the minute he landed in Bangui, the capital of the Central African Republic, it was clear this was a visit which would be remembered for far more than the normal jubilation surrounding the arrival of a pontiff. With the blue berets of UN peacekeepers never far from view, Pope Francis had landed in a war zone, creating a security nightmare for his papal bodyguards. But he was determined it would be business as usual, foregoing a bulletproof Pope mobile for an open-sided pickup truck.
The Pope stepped into a country now that is blighted by sectarian conflict between Muslim and Christian militias. He will hope that his message of peace for Catholics is going to resonate among his followers there, and he can use that influence to hopefully create a better relationship between what are right now two warring factions.
Declaring himself a pilgrim of peace, the Pope visited a centre for refugees. Your father, they cried. These people know what it feels like to lose their homes and their loved ones, but they felt lucky to be able to hear the Pope and his pleas to them. In the heat of the day, he asked them simply to say together, "We are all brothers." In a region blighted by conflict and violence, these are the messages of the children of the Central African Republic, otherwise known as CAR. They welcome the Pope and ask for peace. It's a legacy all the countries the Pontiff has visited aspire to.
Pope's visit is a great opportunity not only to bring the attention on the CAR situation, but to bring the attention on the children's of CAR situation.
So you can see how he is touched by the work which missionaries, religious men and women are doing in Kenya.
It will be a shame. Let me put it just frankly. It will be a shame for Uganda to slide to violence, war, after a visit of a prominent person with a clear message of peace, of unity and love of one another.